All right, welcome back to the channel. So, heard some craziness out of Shawn Porter, man. Didn't like it, but hey, that's Shawn Porter, one heck of a champion who says that he believes that if Andre Ward came out today and fought Canelo Alvarez, it would only be a 50-50 fight because of the speed, experience, and strength of Canelo Alvarez. And honestly, if I listen to it, when I listen to it, I think he's almost edging towards Canelo. Let's talk about this silliness that will never happen, or maybe it will if they pay Andre Ward enough money. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Canelo Alvarez is by many people considered to be the #1 fighter in the world. #1 in his skill set, #1 in his commercial draw, and that is something that is repeated pretty regularly. And quite honestly, they're very, very, very solid defenses or solid arguments that you can make in that for those things to be the case, right? Canelo Alvarez has won titles at 154, 160, 168, and 175. Cannot be denied. His skills in the ring are absolutely excellent. His ring generalship is awesome. His effective aggressiveness, his defense, right? Ring generalship, defense, effective aggressive, and clean, effective punching, all top notch, right? Considered by people right now to be the #1 pound for pound fighter in the world. Monetarily, definitely a big fighter. I think you can't really prove it as of late with what's going on with the zone. However, you get my point. He really is a very, very big star in the sport of boxing and should be considered by many to be a great fighter. Problems is the fact that he was on steroids and the fact that he's not fighting the best competition right now that people want to see. However, I can't, going into this conversation, I have to try to give Canelo Alvarez as much props as he can before I turn around and say, Shawn Porter, you're out your mind. Andre Ward will beat that dude like a drum, okay? Now, Andre Ward, with all those things that I said about Canelo Alvarez, the boxing side of it with Andre Ward is absolutely 100% true. This is besides Floyd Mayweather Jr., this is definitely, in my opinion, the best fighter that has fought since the year 2000 over the last 21 years. And in my opinion, there's no comparison between Andre Ward in the ring and Canelo Alvarez. I think if you look at their skill sets, first of all, if you take the steroids out of it, right? And I'm sorry, you can be a Canelo fan all you want. You got to take the steroids out of that. Okay, you got to take the steroids out. You got to take the steroids into consideration and say, what will he do with an Andre Ward where Canelo doesn't get that little bit of bump, right? But let's just assume that he doesn't have the bump and look at the styles of the fighters themselves. If you look at the styles of the fighters themselves in a record, dude, there's just really no comparison between the two of those guys. Andre Ward was the absolute best at 168, proved it. And while he was at 168, beat the best 175 pounder in Chad Dawson. Then after he went through a Super 6 tournament, beat Mikhail Kessler, beat Carl Froch, beat Sergio, what's his name? Biku, forget his name, but just a bunch of terrific fights coming up from, I don't understand why he wasn't favored to win it, but hey, he wasn't favored to win it, coming up from an underdog to win that, and then to win all of the fights for the rest of his career, and then to beat Sergey Kovalev, a fresh Sergey Kovalev, after having taken some time off and moved to 175. Andre Ward is just, in my opinion, if you look at it from his outboxing to the fighting in the mid-range to fighting up close, just an all-around better fighter than Canelo Alvarez. And if the two of those guys met, if Andre Ward I think Andre Ward might need 5, 6. If he gets 5 fights, he's going to be the guy. 3, 4 fights, he's going to beat the guy. Because Andre Ward is not that old. He's kept his body fresh. I have no doubt that he could go in there and beat Canelo Alvarez and beat Canelo Alvarez like a drum. But what exactly is it that Shawn Porter's point of view is, right? Because that's my point of view. But Shawn says, look, man, his speed, his punch placement, and all that are just so incredible that he would make it a 50-50 fight with him and Andre Ward. Now, again, I'm hoping what he meant is that it's a 50-50 fight if Andre Ward comes out right now, right? So maybe it's a 50-50 fight if Andre Ward literally gets out of his chair, goes to train for 6 months or however, like 4 months, right? Has this training camp and jumps right in there with Canelo Alvarez. At that point in time, I would call it a 50-50 fight because I don't know how much ring rust there is on Andre Ward. But if you look at what Canelo Alvarez does in the ring and you match that up with what Andre Ward does in the ring, I can't see how anybody could say that Canelo Alvarez can win that fight. First of all, Canelo Alvarez is somebody that really does like the pot shot, right? He likes the pot shot. He's kind of a plotter who follows behind the guy and is looking to pot shot in between holes, right? Really, not with Andre Ward, dude. Andre Ward is going to close that distance between him and Canelo Alvarez. He's going to make that fight ugly. He's going to make Canelo have to fight in on the inside. He's going to work that body to death because, you know, one of the best attributes of Canelo Alvarez is that Canelo Alvarez, right, has great upper body movement, and it's very, very hard to hit that dude in his head. Like, it's almost impossible to hit that dude in his head, right, cleanly, unless he, you know, is willing to take one to deliver one. But with Andre Ward's defense, first of all, on the inside with his elbows and blocking punches and timing punches, I can't see Canelo Alvarez ever really getting into any real flow with Andre Ward. And I just see Andre Ward completely breaking the dude down and stopping him right now. So this is something that was nice to be said by Shawn Porter, right? And, you know, where he's being complimentary of Canelo Alvarez, but at the same time, you know, I don't think that is a fair comparison, man. Like, if Andre Ward, like the fight with Canelo Alvarez and Floyd Mayweather Jr., right, where Canelo lost pretty much every round, got outboxed easily, right? People say, well, okay, that was at a certain time in his career. He doesn't really consider that as a big loss. He's learned more. He's adjusted for that style. What style is he going to adjust for to bring around Andre Ward? Like, who exactly is it that Canelo Alvarez has fought that is going to teach him the things that Andre Ward would teach him? And Andre Ward at the time was a better, like Andre Ward now, I do believe could get, relative to how good he is, could get to that stage that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was at in his career when he beat Canelo Alvarez. The only difference is that now you got an Andre Ward that's just a lot bigger, a lot stronger. You got almost a 6-foot Andre Ward walking around who's going to be a healthy 175. I'm sorry, I can't see it. And on top of it, I think I wouldn't say that it's an insult to Andre Ward, but I mean, come on, man. You know, this guy, like Canelo Alvarez, got all of the accolades and everything that he's deserved in his career. The money, the fame, the accolades, you know what I mean? He gets a lot of respect for what he does in the ring. He doesn't get a lot of criticism for certain things that have happened, like those PEDs and not fighting certain people. That's not anything that you can say about Andre Ward. Andre Ward dominated fighters from the beginning of his, pretty much from 12 years old to the day he retired, right? There wasn't no slip-ups. There was no, let me fight this guy and, let me go with Mikkel Kessler or somebody that has more experience to me, and then him having to pay catch-up and losing the fight. The only fight that people thought he came close to losing, and I personally did not think, I thought he won that fight against Sergey Kovalev, he comes back and gets a knockout. So, you know, I'm not really feeling what Shawn Porter is saying in this regard. I mean, this particular time, I think he might be just being kind of complimentary to Canelo, but I'm not really feeling it. Anyway, you let me know, what do you think would happen in a fight if Andre Ward came out of retirement to fight Canelo Alvarez now, or what do you think would happen if a prime Andre Ward in the best of his best shape at 168, right, fought Canelo Alvarez at 168? Personally, I think it's just a beat down beyond belief. But hey, that's just my take. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.